Croeso, Difda, Bernachtin, Gia Hwitch, Fulcher, Daymat. Welcome to the Celtic Myths and Legends podcast. I am your humble host, Sian Esther Powell, and I'm going to be taking you on a journey through all the myths and legends of the 6 Celtic nations. That's Wales, Cornwall, Brittany, Isle of Man, Scotland and Ireland. Welcome. Welcome. Some of you might be thinking, oh, cool, blimey, this is early for a podcast episode, ain't it? Well, one of my loose goals, because I'm doing loose goals in 2024, I'm not doing resolutions or anything like that because you just sort of set yourself up to fail. But one of my loose goals is that I want to do 24 episodes in 2024. My birthday is also on the 24th and I'm going to be 30 this year. So don't get me wrong, I don't really believe in the sort of like supernatural power of manifesting or like woo-woo stuff like that. But I do genuinely believe that there is validity to putting yourself into a positive mindset because you open up a lot more opportunities for yourself and you have goals to work towards. So I think things like manifesting and writing in your journal and stuff like that, I think it can be really helpful and positive. And mindful, that's the word, mindful. So my mindful loose goal for 2024 is that I want to upload 24 episodes to this podcast, which is going to be sort of like at the start of the month and at the kind of end of the month. No, so there should be roughly 2 weeks in between each podcast. So basically I want to do a bi-weekly. Is it bi-weekly? Fortnightly podcast. I think bi-weekly is every 2 weeks, isn't it? Or is it 2 a week? I don't know. I also want to do at least two good quality, well-researched video essays on YouTube on some, pretty cool folklore topics. So I would love to do a topic on perhaps folklore and fanaticism and the Fremen in Dune. I think that would be really great. I'm just obsessed with Dune lately. I'm going to put that out there right now. I recently read Dune for the first time. I loved the films. I'd seen the Denis Villeneuve film when it came out in cinema, and I liked the goofy, wacky David Lynch one. I hadn't realised that he didn't have final cut, and actually it's a really sore point and quite tragic for him, bless him. But I'm a big defender of the David Lynch Dune. I think it's wacky, crazy fun, and actually there's some elements of it that are so spot on, and he really gets the weirdness of the world right. But of course the newer one is better. It's a better film, and I loved it. And I oh my god, I loved the book. I loved the book so much. I loved it. I cannot believe that it took me so long to read. I flew through it. I think that I always put it off because I thought that I would love it, but I thought that it would take me really long to read and that I was never in the right headspace and stuff like that. But again, I think I was in a very negative spiral sometimes. So I would tell myself, oh, you can't do that because it won't be for you. Well, I flew through it. I think I read Dune in about four or 5 days. And this was over Christmas. So I was also doing like Christmassy stuff with my nan and what have you. But I flew through it. I absolutely loved it. And now I'm obsessed with Dune. So yes, I'm definitely going to do a YouTube video on Dune and the folklore, like I said, the folklore and the prophecy and the religious elements within Dune. I'd also want to do one on perhaps the Irish Banshee. Is she as scary as we all think? And of course, you guys who have listened to the Banshee episode will know that, or will think that probably not. She's not actually as scary as you think. What else do I want to do? I want to do a lot more storytelling sessions. So if you are looking for a storyteller, you know, whatever, hire me. Give me a job. No, I want to do a lot more storytelling sessions. I'm going to collaborate a lot more with people. And I'm hoping to get some guests on the podcast this year. I don't know. I'm not going to make any promises on I'm going to do X amount of guests or what have you, because I really have not sure at the moment. I don't have that planned out. But I am planning on having a few guests on the show, some of whom you may know, some you might not. Some will just be like personal friends and people that I know. you might know them as well. Who knows? Maybe the world is a small place. Anyway, that's a big preamble, but I wanted to get that over and done with. This is the first episode of the year. Happy New Year, everyone. I do hope that you had a lovely Christmas and New Year. And if you didn't, well, I hope that at least we're kind of walking into 2024 with at least a little bit of hope and enthusiasm and resilience. I started it off very doom and gloomy, I must admit, but I'm trying to center myself and get myself feeling enthusiastic about the year ahead. So I think this is my big goal is the 24 episodes. So yes, I'm very excited about it. So those of you who have been listening to the show for a long time will know that every episode I cover one of the 6 Celtic nations. So we are, of course, back to Isle of Man. And I've done a few different things on this show. You know, we've done medieval literature, we've done folklore, we've done ballads. Have we done ballads? I think we did ballads, didn't we? I don't know. Maybe we should do more of those. We've done food. And now we're going to talk about, I guess, like a folk custom in Isle of Man, and that is the Manx White Boys dance, which simply because of the white clothes worn. So the White Boys is it's a traditional mummers play in Isle of Man, and it usually occurs around Christmas time, so I'm just about trying to tap into the tiny amounts of Christmas cheer that might still be floating around. For me, my Christmas cheer is depleted. I'm very sorry. I have got post-merry fatigue. But we still have the Christmas tree up, so, you know, I'm sure many other people do, so there's got to be a tiny bit of Christmas cheer. Hogswatch cheer floating around. I did watch The Hogfather on Christmas last year, and I loved it. I loved it so much. That came out in 2006, by the way. The Hogfather, the Terry Pratchett TV films. 2006. I think I watched it. I did watch it in 2006 when I would have been 12. I certainly watched it then, and I think I watched it for a good few years following that. But I think I'm going to bring it back as my Christmas tradition because it's great fun and I love it. So the White Boys play is performed around Christmas time, and it seems that it's often performed in public places, but I think that it is also performed on stage as well. I've been watching Culture Vannin, so big up to Culture Vannin. If you're interested in like the minority language of Isle of Man, the Manx language, and the folk customs and some of the folklore and stuff like that, then look up the YouTube channel Culture Vannin because there's so much cool stuff on there. So I watched some performances of the White Boys dance or the Manx sword dance as it's otherwise known on there, and that seemed to imply that you can also do it on stage. And the play itself is about knights basically just beating each other up and slaying one another, and then they are then resurrected, and then you get the song and the dance, so you get the sword dance. And there are historical scripts apparently going back to 1832, and it's still performed today, I believe. Any Manx friends out there, please let me know if you've recently watched a White Boys play, or if that's something that you have never heard about, you've never seen, and I'm actually just talking out of my bum. But from what I can gather, there is no script, but it always includes those elements. It always has a bunch of knights and saints, knights fighting each other, killing each other, and then being resurrected by a doctor. And then there's a carol and the sword dance to finish. I found an excerpt from the Isle of Man Times from the 5th of January 1897, and this can give you an example of the play would have been like even then and hopefully is still today. The whole of the programme is of a purely Manx flavour. The quaint old Manx folk songs Hunt the Wren and Hop Tunay will be given just as they are given by the boys who go around on our houses singing these songs. Then the White Boys will enact the wondrous deeds done by the Knight St. George and the fighting man from Egypt in the comical White Boys costume. All the singers, including the chorus, will be in appropriate costume, which will add greatly to the interesting nature of the affair. And then it goes on to say that a lot of important people will be there, and some people are even coming all the way from London to see the occasion. I also have an excerpt from 1951 about the English Folk Dance and Song Society's festival at the Royal Albert Hall, London. For some it will mean a day and night of travelling, but distance is no object to these people whose desire it is to rekindle a passion for the poetry of motion in this first big show staged by the society. From Cornwall will come a man dressed as the dying Obios, who will be led by a mayor in the May Day Obios dance, led on by a teaser. He will continuously die and resurrect himself. A native of the Isle of Man will represent Norse and Gaelic traditions by dancing the Manx sword dance, believed to have been part of the initiation of the old kings of Man. Now, how true do we think that assertion actually is? This idea of an ancient sword dance, or I found in other sources the dirk dance, being this ancient, unbroken tradition that extends all the way back to the old kings of Man. So as I was researching this topic, it was initially going to just be on the sort of the white boys, mummers play and subsequent sword dance. But then I got into a whole rabbit hole on Manx sword dance, and then I ended up kind of in the middle of reading all of these different articles and essays on the controversies facing the Manx revival, the Manx cultural revival of the 20th century. And I think it brings up a lot of really interesting things, so I'd be kind of remiss not to mention it within this episode. I came across this article written by George Broderick for the University of Mannheim called The Dirk Dance of the Kings of Man, Genuine Tradition or Cultural Invention? And one of the main sources for this is the work of Mona Douglas, who was a Manx cultural activist, hugely influential in the Manx revival of the 19th century in terms of language, culture and that sort of thing. Very much following in the footsteps of Sophia Morrison, who she did have some correspondence with just before Sophia's death. I have mentioned Morrison on the podcast before when I've talked about Manx folklore, because she was hugely influential in collecting folklore and fairy tales and that kind of thing. I think I called her Sophia at the time, but it's actually Sophia. Sorry, I'm learning all the time and trying to better myself. But the big difference between Mona Douglas and Sophia Morrison is that Sophia Morrison's work is a lot of it is based around Manx language and the sort of rhythms of the language and also folk tales and that kind of thing. Well, Mona Douglas and a lot of her controversies actually centre around her collection of Manx folk dance and song. But I must say that Mona also did collect folklore as well, and she was so important and hugely influential in kind of bringing Manx culture into the forefront and actually, engaging with other nations and putting Manx culture and Manx dance and song to other nations, representing Isle of Man. But it seems that her primary interest was getting the people of Isle of Man, the Manx people, dancing and singing and engaging with Manx culture and Manx heritage and creating a strong sort of identity of Manx culture. I think that she was very successful in that and shouldn't be negated. Some of the controversies surrounding her are quite reminiscent of the controversies surrounding Villemarqué when I talked about his work in my Ballads of Brittany episode. Not everyone was very happy with that episode, I must admit. I'm very sorry, but this show, I like it to be a bit diverse. Sometimes we're talking about creatures, sometimes we're going to talk about medieval literature, sometimes we're going to talk about more the kind of academia around Celticism and that kind of thing. So I'm just putting it out there. This show, I know it's called Celtic Myths and Legends, but I'm using it a very broad kind of lens to look at a lot of different things. Sometimes we will look at food, sometimes we'll look at cultural festivals, sometimes we'll talk about ghoulies and beasties and wonderful creatures, and sometimes we'll talk about heroes, mythic heroes of the Middle Ages. But sometimes I want to delve into the idea of Celticism and the academia and the cultural activity and activism surrounding the work produced in the Celtic nations, and just analysing that a little bit, because I think it's really interesting. But more importantly, I think it's really important. Oh my god, that was not... You can tell I don't write a script for myself and I just work off the cuff and most importantly, it was really important. But I do think it is important to understand the cultural context around some of the things that we discuss on this show. There's a lot of it. It's a very muddled term, Celtic. I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I've talked about this previously in the show, and I'm going to continue to talk about it throughout the whole podcast forever, as long as it remains. I hope it remains for a while, but as long as I keep making this show, I'm going to be having these discussions. So Mona Douglas in the 1930s, I believe, claimed that a gentleman named Jack Kermode was the one that taught her about the Manx dirk dance, and his wife hummed the tune as he was dancing. So I have gotten this excerpt from the Manx dirk dance as ritual by Mona Douglas, included in the Journal of the International Folk Music Council, Volume 9, published in 1957 by Cambridge University Press. It is a curious fact that our most distinctive Manx ritual dance has become generally known in its modern presentation by a name which was never used for it traditionally in the island. The original name has been lost and the present title is quite modern. In my childhood, long before I ever saw this dance, I used to hear it spoken of as something very mysterious and difficult. I do not think I ever heard the word sacred used, but certainly the way it was always mentioned with a respectful lowering of the voice suggested something sacramental. Most of the north side parishes of the island knew it by the reputation as the Kirk Morgold sword dance of the kings, and when I was actually taken to see Jack Kermode perform it, I had the feeling of an important and exciting event. There was ceremony in his approach to the performance. In his thatched cottage on the sea beach, the weapon hung in a place of honour over the open hearth fire, and he removed his shoes and his cap as his wife took it down and handed it to him. Then she poured and handed to him a beaker of whiskey, which he took in his left hand to drink while holding the sword point upright in his right hand. Then he handed the beaker back to her. She set it down on the table and crouched down beside the fire to sing while he danced. So she does paint an extremely evocative scene here, and there's no doubt about the fact that she did collect a lot of stories. She did collect a lot of dances and songs. Some of the controversies are around whether or not she embellished them, whether or not she added her own material and passed them off as more ancient than they actually are, and that kind of thing. But she does paint a really excellent picture here of a gentleman, getting a beaker of whiskey from his wife, and she's humming the tune as he's dancing around point upright with a sword that has pride of place in his home. Like, it's really evocative writing. So my question for you all is, does it actually matter? Does it matter if this is an unbroken tradition going all the way back to the old kings of Man? I think it's really interesting to look at the motivations behind purporting something to be ancient and, claiming it to be some unbroken tradition. I understand where that's coming from, but I sometimes question and challenge its necessity, especially in proving value to something. So for me, I personally find it quite frustrating when things get claimed to be older than they are, and they get a sort of woo-woo mysticism story around them, because it kind of muddies the waters. However, I also don't really care if something isn't that old. I don't think that the value of a cultural activity, especially dancing and singing, needs to have deep, long roots that span, hundreds and thousands of years. Because let's ask ourselves, why do we dance? We don't dance because our mothers and fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers did. We dance because it's fun. We dance because it brings people together, because dancing and song helps to forge community. And there's a really excellent example of this, and it comes from my wonderful homeland of Cornwall, and that is the music of Harry Glasson. So Harry Glasson is a chap down in West Cornwall, still alive, and he's written a bunch of Cornish songs. And, he's still alive, he's still around, he still sings them, he still tours with people. So there's no pretense that these are ancient Cornish folk songs. They are modern songs. They're only a few decades old, but they are sung so extensively in all of the pubs of Cornwall. Anywhere where there's a pub, shout. In fact, I'm going to do an episode on the Cornish pub shout because I'm very entrenched in the culture of it, and it's really interesting, and I want to tell you guys more about it. I don't have it as a planned topic for Cornwall this year. I have some really great legends and myths coming up for the Cornwall episodes this year, but I think that I'll probably do it as a bonus episode for Patreon. So I've never done that before. I've never done like exclusive content for the Patreon because, you know, I've always said this podcast is free, and it is. All the main episodes are free. But I think I'll do a bonus episode on Cornish pub shouts because it is really important to Cornish culture in my view, and I've got lots of thoughts on it. I'm very entrenched in it. I sing in a lot of Cornish shouts, and they are essentially a sing song in a pub where you get together, but not always in a pub, but, you know, predominantly in a pub where you get together and you sing songs. So yeah, I'm going to do a bonus episode for the Patreon about that, and I'm going to go through a lot of Cornish traditional songs and what some of their meanings might be and what the significance of them are, and I'm going to talk about the culture of pub shouts and that sort of thing as well. And I think that'll be really exciting and really interesting. I've never done a bonus exclusive Patreon episode before, so if you do want to listen to that, sign up to my Patreon. Wow, that was smooth, wasn't it? I have to admit, I'm putting it out there right now. This is the year where I'm trying to make big moves with my podcast and my storytelling and my creative projects and stuff like that. So I'm not going to be really obnoxious with it, but I am taking myself a lot more seriously. So yeah, I think there probably will be exclusive Patreon episodes. I think I will be pushing a lot more in that direction. There will always be this podcast, you know, there will always be the main episodes that I plan on doing 2 a year. Oh my god, not 2 a year, 2 a month. Oh my god, there have been years before where I've only done 2 in a year, which is not good. But my point is, we are not going back to those times. This is a good, exciting time for the podcast, and I have exciting things planned for it. So yeah, I'm going to make an episode on Cornish shouts for Patreon. So if you want to listen to that, sign up on there. If you don't want to listen to it, fine. I'm not, please, I really do not expect anyone to support this podcast with money. I never expected that. But like I said, I want to move more in the creative direction with my life. And a big part of that is my podcast and getting these topics out through the podcasts. Anyway, whatever. So that was a good old-fashioned Sean tangent, wasn't it? That was good fun. Anyway, so my example from Cornwall was that things don't have to be ancient to have huge cultural value. So Harry Glasson has written a bunch of Cornish songs, one of which is Cornwall, My Home. And this is a song that is, as soon as it gets sung in any pub, people will join in and sing. People will know the lyrics and they'll sing. And honestly, you get tears, people get really emotional about this. And it's become a song that really, it does encapsulate the kind of the Cornish spirit, if you will. It has become the unofficial national song of Cornwall. And it's really exciting to have visitors hear that, you know, to have people come down to Cornwall on holiday and hear Cornwall, My Home sung by Cornish people with all of the emotion that it evokes. Some people are a little bit iffy about it, especially if someone, you know, wasn't born in Cornwall and has moved to Cornwall. I think sometimes they can feel a little bit like they're locked out of the experience of it. But I don't think the song is meant in that way. I think the song is really meant to be quite inclusive and just proud of Cornwall. So I'm going to give it a little sing-song here. So you guys are welcome. And this will hopefully demonstrate that something doesn't have to be ancient, it doesn't have to be super old to have huge cultural value and to be really, really significant to a culture. I should mention though that one of my ears has a bit of hearing loss because I think I have an ear infection, so I don't think my singing is going to be great, but just listen to this song and hopefully you'll be able to appreciate what I mean about it. I've stood on Cape Cornwall in the sun's evening glow, on Tune Hill at Newlyn to watch the fishing fleets go, watch the sheave wheels at Giva as they spun around, and heard the men singing as they go underground, and no one will ever move me from this land until the Lord calls me to sit at his hand. For this is my Eden, and I'm not alone. For this is my Cornwall, and this is my home. I was going to do the whole song, then I thought, actually, my voice is sounding really bad today, and that's quite embarrassing, because usually I'm a decent singer, and also it seems a bit cheeky to do a whole kind of quasi-national song in the middle of another nation's episode. So yeah, I might do the whole song. I might do a few other songs for the Patreon. Anyway, enough of that. I'm not going to bring up the Patreon again, except right at the end. So that is a really good example of something that's not actually that old, but has huge, huge, huge significance. So that's just some of my thoughts around that whole concept, really, is does something have to be this ancient, unbroken link to the far distant past for it to have any value? I don't think that it does. However, what's really interesting in George Broderick's essay on this whole topic that I mentioned earlier, the Dirk Dance of the Kings of Man, Genuine Tradition or Cultural Invention, is that in his conclusion he talks about people claiming that Mona Douglas's work was simply to help revitalise this Manx cultural revival, and a lot of it was embellished, a lot of it was made up, but it was simply for that purpose. However, he also makes the really good point that when we're talking about things like folklore and folk dance and folk song, a lot of these customs and traditions existed for a very, very, very long time without writing them down. And he uses a really interesting example from Dr. Virginia Blackenhorn, an ethnomusicologist in the School of Celtic and Scottish Studies, University of Edinburgh. And this is an excerpt from his essay. Draws my attention to the case of the Scottish Gaelic song Greagal Creesh, which was known to have been composed in or shortly after 1570, but which did not surface in print until 1813 in the Turner collection. It had clearly circulated in oral tradition for all of that time, and apparently continued to do so down to the 20th century. In the case of the Dirk Dance, such a survival is theoretically possible, though we would need to postulate a period of several hundred years of non-attestation before it eventually surfaced in the early 20th century. And I think that's a great point to make. It's kind of unlikely that it was floating around for hundreds and hundreds of years, without being written down or mentioned, but it's theoretically possible. Like, it is possible that there's a ton of songs out there, a ton of dances, a ton of cultural material that was never recorded and so has been lost. And that is the exact reason why I am actually in favour of revivals. I'm actually in favour of bringing back traditions or creating new traditions from the tiny scraps of previous cultural traditions or history or reference or what have you, and making something new for people to enjoy and engage in and take part in. I've seen this a lot in places around Cornwall as well. We've got tons of cultural festivals in Cornwall, from the Bolster Giant Day to the Obios and Padstow May Day to Monto and Penzance. We've got so much stuff going on, and there's a bunch of festivals and previous customs that I would really like to revive and revitalise as well. Like I've mentioned before, Allantide, the kind of Cornish Halloween. I would really love to bring that back to my museum or bring it to another venue, what have you. I'd really love that to happen. And not because I'm trying to make some false fabrication of Cornish history, but because I want people to have things to take part in, to engage in, to build community around, to have fun with, to take pride in. Because I'm going to go off on a random, totally crazy tangent right now, but I was on a dog walk the other day in it's a beautiful area. It's a hidden valley not too far away from me, and it has a lot of the remnants of China stone quarrying, but it's beautiful. It's like this wooded valley. with waterfalls. It's stunning. Old, they're not actually that old. I think they're about 100 years old. You know, old ruins of China stone quarrying works. So old buildings and chimneys and water wheels. And it's beautiful. I love it. But there is rubbish everywhere. There is just rubbish and crap and litter everywhere, and it makes me so angry and frustrated. So I don't think it's a bad thing to try and instill a bit of pride and a bit of respect for the place where you live and where you grew up or where you've moved to. I'm absolutely 100% not supporting any kind of ridiculous ethno-nationalism that would say that, you know, to be part of a culture you have to have these genetics or skin colour or what have you. No, I'm very much about, I think that folklore customs, song, dance, music, folklore stories, I think it's important for communities because it brings people together. It should be about inclusivity, not exclusivity. So I think it'd be a brilliant thing for people in Cornwall to love Cornwall, to appreciate Cornwall. And for me, part of that would be instilling this love for Cornish history, but also Cornish storytelling and creativity and the landscape. So for me, that's why I think it's really important for places to have a sense of identity. And it's not to make other places lesser. It's not to say, oh, we're so great, so other places are worse. No, that's not what I believe in at all. I just believe that everywhere should have a strong sense of identity that is formed around kind of fun and love and appreciation and community. That might sound soppy to a lot of people, but anyway, that's just some of my personal beliefs. Might be totally unfounded, and I'm not saying that I have the correct grasp on this whole topic, that my view is the only important view. It's not. It's very personal to me. But that's why I think that it is. I think dances and cultural customs and folk songs and stuff are super important because, like I said, they bring people together. They get people enjoying themselves, enjoying where they are, you know, and I just think that's a good thing. And cue philosophical voice. In this world of smartphones where we're all so lonely and disconnected, I'm going to cut that off, but I really do think that it's important for us to be engaging with ourselves and each other, and engaging with the place where we live and having real life communities that we are part of, and that kind of help us a sense of place and community that we can share with other people. That's my big thing, is that when we have this, we want to share it with people. It can't be a coveted thing. It can't be, oh, you're not from here, so you can't do this. No, it should be about, you're not from here? Oh my God, have you heard about this? Anyway, that's my my utopian vision of regional culture and community. So I don't know if Mona Douglas or Sophia Morrison or any of these other wonderful, important women in cultural activism and collecting of folklore and song and dance had these same kind of feelings and motivations as me. But in a way, sometimes it's nice to imagine that they did, and I'm part of a journey and continuation of that kind of work. That's my thesis on why dancing is important to culture and folk life, I guess. So to finish off this episode, we'll go back to the White Boys Mummers play and dance, and I'll very specifically talk about the sword dance that happens today. So I found this courtesy of Culture Vannin. Again, big up Culture Vannin. Thank you very much. And it looks like it was originally printed in Rincarin Vannin. I'm so sorry. Rincarin Vannin. In 1983. Oh my God. Thank you to Culture Vannin for uploading this, which was originally printed in Rincarin Vannin by Slagin T. Oh God, I'm so sorry for all of my pronunciations. I'm really sorry to all my Manx friends. Anyway, in 1983. Okay. The sword dance, which accompanies the Mummers play and is danced by 6 men and the Doctor. The whole dance is performed in slipping skip step, and throughout the dance, the doctor capers about in and out of the movements. The dance was collected by Leighton Stowell. And then it has the music for the dance, but I can't read music, so that's not very helpful to myself or any of you. But there we go. That was a lot of effort for not much return. But essentially, this is a dance for 6 dancers, and it ends in a pretty cool and iconic interlocking of the swords, which creates kind of hexagon of the swords. So the sword goes in your right hand, as described by Mona Douglas. So starting with your right foot, you do a sort of 1, 2, 3 skip, alternating feet, until the dancer's formation ends up being a sort of a line, 3 each. And a middle. And then the front couple clash their swords, creating an arch, and they move backwards as the other pairs move forward, and then so on and so forth. And then after doing that a couple times, the dancers then turn to their right and they move in a circle around. And after a little while of that, you stop and you grab the sword tip of the person in front of you. So I'm assuming these aren't proper swords, they're not very sharp. We're not advocating, slicing the fingers off of your friends. Maybe your enemies, though. Just kidding. Then there's a lot of complicated moves like arches and all sorts of other really cool, fun stuff. But if you want to have the full experience, you should really watch the YouTube video Manx Dance Lesson, The White Boys Dance, uploaded by Culture Vannin on YouTube. It ends with that hexagon of the swords joined up together. So as I said at the beginning of the episode, this happens around Christmas time and happens along in many different places on the Isle of Man and streets and, in lots of different places. So yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting topic, something a little bit different. My next Manx episode will be back to probably a creature feature, one of the folkloric creatures of the Isle of Man. But I thought this was a really nice topic for now, and it gave me a really great rabbit hole to dig myself into and research some of the different conversations around the Manx revival movement, which has lots of parallels with all of the Celtic nations and their own cultural revival moments as well. Thank you so much to everyone who listens to this podcast. It really does mean so much to me. This is the first one of the year, obviously, 2024. This is a new bright year ahead. I have a lot of goals and a lot of hopes for this year, and yeah, I really just want to put a lot more of my time and energy and love into this podcast, because it means a lot to me, and it means a lot to me that you're out there listening to it. So thank you ever so much. Big shout out to my latest patrons on Patreon. Is it Beige? I'm so sorry, Beige. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but Beige, Brie and Charlotte. Thank you so much for being patrons on there. As I said, I never expect you guys to support me on Patreon. I never expect that of people. But if you do want to, then this is the time to do it, I suppose. Now that I'm some kind of proper big shot professional podcaster who does exclusive Patreon content. Wow. Also, to everyone who is a Red Dragon tier on Patreon, I am slowly but surely making my way through all of your mini episodes, and I will get those to you as soon as possible. Some of you have been waiting a very, very, very long time, but I hope that you understand. I'm getting them to you slowly and surely. There we go. Slow and steady wins the race. We know our fables. Anyway, thank you ever so much for listening, and we'll probably be uploading around the 20th of January. So we shall see. Fingers crossed. Bye. I am your host, Sian Esther Powell, and that has been another episode of the Celtic Myths and Legends podcast. If you would like to find it elsewhere on the interwebs, you can also find me on Twitter at Celtic Myths Pod, on Facebook under Celtic Myths and Legends Podcast, on Patreon at Celtic Myths Pod, as well as Instagram at Celtic_Sian, and also CelticSian.co.uk. Thank you, Muraz, Diolch, Tachpalet, Guramahagat, Trigare, Guramayed. Thank you, and speak to you next time. Thank you.